Howdy everybody. This is Nathan Donnelly with Northwest Resilience, going out for my daily walk, and thought I'd bring you along, trying to make sure I get outside for a good period of time, at least once or twice a day. Now that the weather's nice, especially, it's kind of hard to not get outside, but I've got a little mile and a half loop I do outside my door every day, and I'm hoping to get out and collect a bunch of nettles later on, put in the freezer and to dry. But I wanted to talk about, speaking of nettles, I wanted to talk a bit about food, and maybe cover some topics regarding food and diet that you're not typically going to see in your everyday book about survival. I happen to live in a pretty wildish area, not by accident, I had a bit of an experience with that a couple of winters ago. I've had other experiences in life where I have lost a considerable amount of weight because of lack of food. When I was on alone, winter before last, I lost close to 60 pounds, and I did an expedition in Ecuador once where we kind of ran out of money, and I lost 25 pounds in like 5 weeks, doing botany surveys and tree planting expeditions in the Amazon and the Andes, and could only afford bananas for the last week and a half I was out there to eat. Best bananas I've ever had in my life, though. But and other occasions where, I've spent most of my life, pretty much my whole adult life, living and working, as an outdoor professional, and it's not typically a good way to make money. So I'm drawing on a little bit of experience of not having what I would like to have had for food on a few occasions for the long term. And I wanted to share what I've learned from those experiences with you all, because I think the rice and beans mentality of survival food, while still valuable, is not the end-all be-all. Particularly if we're going into a situation where a good immune system is going to be really important. Always when you're going into a disaster, you need to have a good, strong immune system. But also you need to have this thing up here working really well. If your brain's not working well, if your mood's bad, everything else is going to deteriorate from that nucleus of bad. And on the opposite side of that, if you can keep your brain and your heart, your emotional side working really well, then you'll be doing all right for yourself, or you're a lot more likely to, at least. So I wanted to share what I'm doing to help with that, and there's a few foods that I have used in the past to recover from adrenal fatigue, to keep myself healthy when I didn't have a lot of other food, just to keep, all systems go. And those boil down to really nutrient-dense foods. I like to have on hand nutrient-dense foods. People call them superfoods, that store well and travel well, have a long shelf life, and I'm guaranteed to get a lot of nutrition out of them when I eat them. So, short list of what some of those foods might be would be cacao nibs. Top of my list is cacao nibs. Cacao is the most complex food known to man, nutritionally speaking. You break it down, all its chemical constituents and all that stuff. Cacao is off the charts. It's what chocolate is made from, obviously. Cocoa is a processed version of it. But you can get straight cacao nibs from most bulk food sections these days. And they're typically harvested, out of the jungle somewhere. So it's almost a wild food in a lot of ways. And when I was in the Amazon 10 or so years ago, one of the jobs I was doing out there was to find new varieties of cacao. Because worldwide, I guess there's a disease going around and ruining a lot of the harvest for cacao globally. So we were trying to find new varieties in addition to a bunch of other stuff, and hopefully also allow for the jungle we were in to be protected, so that the indigenous people who live there could continue to harvest off of the wild foods that are in the forest, so they didn't get cut down and burned and turned into God knows what. So when I was down there, we were looking at cacao trees everywhere. They're dropping their fruits on the ground, and never once did I find a cacao pod on the ground that wasn't completely ripped apart by the wildlife. Every damn thing in the jungle was looking for cacao. It's just like one of the laws of the jungle there. That's just such a nutritious food that nobody's going to miss out on it. And I was down there for weeks. Never once did I find one. The only time I got my hands on a cacao pod that was intact was after climbing about 105 feet up into the biggest tree I've ever been in my life. It took 3 days to get there. So we can buy that in bulk right now, and it stores really well, tastes good. You can add it to all kinds of other meals, and yeah, it's just the top of my list. When I was out on alone, one of my 10 items there was gorp. We were allowed to use 3 ingredients: peanuts, raisins, and chocolate. And for my chocolate, I chose 95% pure dark chocolate and broke it up into chips, just because I considered that to be my multivitamin out there. Other items you might want to put on that list would be goji berries or any dried berries. They're a dried food. Drying food is the number one way to preserve its nutrition. When you dry foods, it's done at low temperatures, obviously low humidity, and it denatures the food as little as possible. So when you freeze or cook something, the temperature variability breaks down all the molecules and proteins and all the vitamins and everything that's in there. Not completely, obviously, but the more you do it and the more times you do it, the more effect that's going to have on the nutritional quality of whatever you're trying to eat. So food dryers, typically you're going to set them to stay below 118 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's not enough to break down all the enzymes, the digestive enzymes that are really important for getting the maximum amount of nutrition out of your food. And so for the long term, it stores food the best. Drying food is also great because it doesn't require a freezer or refrigeration or really even any special equipment. I have a pretty nice Excalibur food dryer that I got used a few years ago. It was broken and I fixed it, and I've dried hundreds of pounds of food in it since then. But you can rig something up with some window screens out in the sun. The screens are just to keep the flies off. And if it's the right time of year, you can do a lot of drying. You can also turn on your oven, if you have power or gas, to its lowest setting. Leave the door cracked open 2 or 3 inches and use your oven as a food dryer. I don't recommend using that, I don't typically recommend doing that, but if your power's out and you still have propane, that might be one way to preserve all the food that's going to otherwise go bad in your freezer. You could make a bunch of jerky or whatever's in there. You can dry it in your oven. That's something you'll have to figure out for yourself if it ever happens to you, but it's a backup option if you've got one of those big propane tanks in your home. So yeah, there's other ways to do it. People have been drying food for tens and tens of thousands of years. It's always worked, meaning it's always gonna work. So I'm not knocking canning and freezing too. I do both of those. I think they're both excellent. Yeah, go for it. So another food on that list, like I said earlier, I'm going to be getting nettles later today. Wild greens, this time of year, right now, it's late March, are coming up all over North America. If you're getting out of the snow yet, then you have one of the most nutrient-dense foods growing all around you. Actually, Jordan Jonas just did a really good video about greens growing in his own yard a day or two ago that was really, really sweet. And I mean, here I'm just randomly walking around my neighborhood, and I can see chickweed. This lighter green stuff is just starting to come up in my own yard. That stuff is about 8 inches tall right now, so I need to go down there and harvest a bunch of that. I might do that tomorrow because it's supposed to get rainy. It's pretty cold and foggy right now. I should probably roll my sleeves down today. But nettles and chickweed and miner's lettuce and purslane and spring beauty, etc., are all ultra high in minerals. Those are the things that keeps this guy going and your immune system strong. So it's not a bunch of calories, I know, but a bunch of calories will keep you alive in a sickly zombie state if you're not getting that other stuff going. So my tactic with the nettles today is going to be going out with a bunch of brown paper bags, filling as many of them as I can, come home, blend a bunch of them up in my blender so that they take up as little of space as I can, put them in freezer bags and then freeze them, and then what I have left I'm going to put in a food dryer and dry that, and that will be stored dry as well. And then I can take any one of those little packets of frozen or dried nettles, drop them in with a pot of rice if I'm doing the beans and rice thing, and have a pretty nutritious meal going. So it's really easy to do. I mean, it's one of the most nutritious things you can eat, and you can pick it up off the ground. This time of year, superfoods can be picked up off of the ground all over North America. Even if you're in a city, if you can find a place that you're reasonably confident hasn't been sprayed with chemicals, then go harvest there. Some other things I like to keep on hand are like chia seeds, super nutritious. Brewer's yeast or nutritional yeast, that's really nutritious, high in B vitamins, which can be really hard to come by, particularly if you run out of animal products. My hands and arms are getting cold, so I'm gonna have to roll my sleeves down here. Maca, which is a root that grows in South America, another South American superfood. It's really good stuff. It's also an adaptogen. Adaptogens help your body adapt to stress, so your adrenals aren't going to be getting blown out. So that's a good thing if you're into herbal medicine at all. You know what adaptogens are and how important they are. And what else do I have that I like to keep on hand? You kind of get the drill at any rate. Those nutrient-dense foods that they're typically dried. Cacao nibs are dried, maca's dried and powdered. Collagen is a good thing to bring in. Sorry, I'm wiggling the camera around. I got to figure out a way to mount this on this T-post or something here. And all right. Yeah, collagen is really important. I do not throw away or even compost bones anymore. If I have bones, they go in the freezer, and when I get enough of them built up, I turn those into broth, and I freeze them in jars. Learn how to freeze in jars. If you don't know how to already, you just basically only fill the jar up, 80% of the way instead of where you normally would, and then the glass won't break in your freezer with the lid on loose until it's frozen. And then I use that broth to make my rice. So all of a sudden my meal of just rice and beans actually now has nettles in it. It has collagen and broth in it, and calcium and all the other minerals that are in bones and tendons and all that stuff. The way I like to do my broth is I save up bones as much as I can. They don't all have to be the same species of animal. If you got what you got, just put it in the pot. And I have an instant pot, so that's got a pressure cooker function on it and a slow cooker function on it, and I do both. I pressure cook it for however long it says to with the machine, and then I'll let it cook for another day or even two to get all the dissolved minerals out of those bones and into the broth, and then I pour that broth into jars and freeze it. And I have not made really rice or grain or any kind of beans in months now without making it out of broth. Just because I don't want empty calories if I can help it. I'm also dealing with a shoulder injury and several decades of having rheumatoid arthritis before I cured that on alone. Which I'm happy to talk about more in another video. If you all are interested, just put something in the comments and I'm happy to do a video about that. It was a pretty important thing in my life. So, yeah, I guess the point of this video is to think beyond the rice and beans. It's important to have calories for sure. Chances are you got a lot on your body already. Let's all admit it, There's a few of us out there that are still skinny, but 45% of the United States is obese right now, meaning we're packing around probably a month or two of calories on our bodies. And this is why we're going into a situation where, starvation can be a thing. And our bodies have evolved over time to store fat for a reason, to get through periods like this. And we haven't had a period like this, a lot of us, in a long time. Although there are 1.5 billion starving people on Earth right now. Hopefully that number doesn't climb too much in the near future. So yeah, think beyond the rice and beans. Get yourself some compact, easy to store, long shelf life, very nutrient dense foods, and get clever with how you want to use them in your diet. I honestly, after you get into cacao nibs, you might just start eating them by the handful as they are. I do that all the time. But some other foods that I think are worth considering wouldn't necessarily be considered superfoods, although some of them are, like butter. If you really want to have some good calories, fats are twice as dense in calories as carbohydrates and proteins are. So butter, man, shit kind of got real in my life the other day when I ran out of butter. That necessitated a grocery store run. So sure would like to have a lot more than I have, but butter's a big one. I bought a bunch of olive oil, peanut butter, really good thing to have. You can buy that in bulk by the bucket sometimes. Things like that. I actually think if I had to run out of a burning house and could only grab one food item to throw in a backpack and get the heck out of there, it would be a big jar of peanut butter with some honey and or maple syrup mixed into it. Honey and maple syrup are two more items that are super clutch because they're pure calories, but those are the two most complex sugar sources that we have. So they don't enter your body all like in one blast, all one way. There's different kinds of sugars, so they need to break down differently in your system, which means that it spreads it out a little bit. It's still sugar, so it's not like eating a complex meal. But your body needs different kinds of sugars for different things. And maple syrup, the darker the better. is I think even more complex than honey, but honey's great. Honey also can have the effect of, if you get local honey, can have the effect of helping you with your allergies in your area. So that's a good thing. And pro tip, if you get the kind of peanut butter like I do that needs to be stirred, then I have found from taking it on backpacking trips, if I pour honey into my peanut butter, right into the oil at the top, before I stir it, and then stir it, the peanut butter doesn't separate again, in warm weather or something like that. So it stays stirred, and it's obviously way delicious. So that's my go-to, like, crap. I'm running away from God knows what. I grab a jar of peanut butter with some honey stirred into it. Haven't tried it with maple syrup yet, but I imagine it would work just as well. Maybe it would separate out again though. So yeah, go for those nutrient dense things, and if you're gonna go for calories, go for calorie dense as well. Starches are great, they have their place, but you can't beat fat. Man, fat was all I cared about when I was out on alone. And those two lake trout that I caught, I called them bacon fish because they were so fatty. It was just dripping off them. And I licked the rock I cooked them off of to get the fat off of that rock too. I mean, it was just such a boon catching one of those things. But I also was really mindful about getting minerals in my body when I was out there. I luckily still had rose hips I could find occasionally. Might have to walk a mile or two for them, but whenever I saw a rose bush, I cleaned it off. I ate 10 or 15 of them whole, crunched up the seeds and everything, and bring the rest home in my pocket. Some of the berry sources were good out there. I found 4 old caribou antlers, which I meant to take home. Unfortunately, 3 of them burned up in the fire, and the 4th one I ate. I didn't have any food the last 10 days I was out there. So the editing was a little silly, saying that I got up at midnight to cook fish soup because I'd run out of fish 10 days before then, at the time of the fire. But what I had been doing for those 10 days is digging up roots out of my shelter floor and cutting them down to a length that would fit in my pot and sticking it in there with chaga and caribou antler. And if you boil an old caribou antler for 3 or more days, it becomes chewable. Still tastes exactly like dirt, but it's calcium and other minerals. So that's what I was doing. And this thing here kept working really well. My brain was super acute. I could think well. I could think clearly. I could catch my emotions and keep myself from spiraling. I was really, really impressed that I was able to do that. The other thing that affected me out there in a big way was electrolytes and salt in particular. I blacked out once. They got that on the show, but I was lightheaded almost constantly the whole time I was out there. And anytime I'd have an episode of lightheadedness, I'd eat some of the trail mix that I got, because the other thing that I did to that trail mix, that was peanuts, raisins, and chocolate, was I dehydrated my raisins when I bought them fully till they were hard as stones, and then I rehydrated them in salt water from the Salish Sea where I live, which I added more salt to. It was like 5 times saltier than seawater normally would be. So I rehydrated the raisins in that salt water, and then I re-dehydrated them in my Excalibur and turned them into salt pills, basically. Had I not done that, I can guarantee I wouldn't have lasted a month out there. So if you're a person who knows you need more salt than normal, we're coming into hot weather here in a few months, buy yourself a big old thing of sea salt. And salt not only has salt in it, sea salt I should say, Himalayan salt and sea salt are only just shy of 90% salt. The rest of it is all the other minerals that are in the ocean, which is what your blood is made up of. You need all those minerals to be operating well, especially physically, but mentally as well. So If you don't have any good sea salt, you should probably get some. The thing about all these foods that I'm talking about also is they're not on people's radar. They're not the rice and beans that have been cleaned out. I haven't been able to buy rice and beans on my island here for 2 weeks because they're gone. But there's still a full stock of all these other superfoods that are way more valuable, especially by weight. They're also a bit more expensive, to be sure, but I'm going to eat them. They're going to keep me healthy whether stuff goes downhill with this or not. So it's not a wasted expense to my mind in the least bit. So yeah, get out there, look for some of those foods that are not on everybody else's radar, and you'll have clear eyes, clear mind, a strong immune system, and you may actually enjoy some aspects of being in quarantine and getting out in nature instead of getting out into the work or city or whatever. And free time scares some people, it seems like, because they got to go up into their own head and live with themselves, but that's such a gift. So try and pursue that gift as much as you can and enjoy it for what it is. We're all in this time in history for a reason, and this is our time. This is why we're here right now. So own that, live it, and find your own best way to navigate this thing. Care for your loved ones any way you can. Stay connected with people. You know, this whole thing of having to be socially distanced and all that stuff doesn't mean that we need to be afraid of each other. It doesn't mean that we need to start or stop loving each other. We need to do that all the harder now. And we need to keep doing it after it's over. And after it's over, we need to get back together with each other and hugging and kissing and holding hands and putting arms around shoulders and being in physical contact with each other again, because that's an important way. That's an important way to be human together. So I wish you all the best. Thanks again. I'm gonna pick another topic pretty soon, and we'll go at length with that as well. Yeah, I hope you're fortunate enough to get to be in as pretty an area as I get to be, with the red-winged blackbirds calling and all that. And I'll see you again soon. Y'all have a good one and be useful.